Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. We're live on Al Jazeera and YouTube. Today, we bring you our most requested show topic from the past week.
I'm Malika Bilal. By popular demand from our online community, we explore alleged slavery in Libya and stories about exploitation and abuse of refugees and migrants.
On vend les Africains là-bas. C'est la vérité. C'est la vérité. On vend l'homme là-bas. Même un enfant de 15 ans libyen, il est dans sa voiture, il a arme. Il vient, il te kidnappe, ça te vend à 200 dinars, 100 dinars. Après encore l'autre aussi, c'est revend. Ça c'est la vérité.
Vous savez, la vidéo de CNN vient, c'est un secret de polichinelle, c'est-à-dire que beaucoup de personnes savent ce qui se passait en Libye.
Aujourd'hui, on s'indigne par rapport aux Africains qu'on est en train de vendre en esclavage. Et la communauté internationale n'en parle pas. On n'a pas fait le choix de venir ici. On veut bien rester chez vous, mais on fuit les bombes qu'on nous ramène là-bas.
Libya is a gateway for many Africans hoping to escape hardship at home, but for thousands, the danger of travelling through a nation in political turmoil can be just as perilous. And the report you just saw has once again put the refugee crisis in the spotlight. The UN-backed government in Tripoli has condemned the trafficking of migrants, and both the EU and African Union say they help evacuate people stuck in Libya. But some human rights groups accuse them all of failing to provide legal pathways to safety.
This story sparked a huge reaction online, with people using hashtag Libyans against slavery to express solidarity with their fellow Africans and to dispel what they said were myths about racism in Libya.
So what can be done to end Libya's slave trade and prevent the continued abuse of people hoping to find safe haven in Europe? Here with us to talk about this, Leonard Doyle, spokesman for the UN-affiliated International Organization for Migration. He joins us from Geneva, Switzerland. In Hamburg, Germany, Larry Moore Macaulay is founder of the Refugee Radio Network. He also lived in Libya prior to the fall of longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi. In Tunisia, Hassan Mouridja is an independent journalist, and in New York, Imad Badi is a social activist normally based in Tripoli. It's good to have you here, gentlemen. Leonard, this headline here from Al Jazeera: slavery is an outrageous reality in Libya. That's UN human rights organizations all saying that. This picture here is incredibly disturbing. This is what you do every day, Larry. What's the reality?
Oh, well, the reality is... Are you talking to Leonard or Larry?
And Larry and Leonard. Larry, you deal with the refugees once they get to Europe. Leonard, you know what's happening back on the African continent. Larry, let's start with you.
Well, we receive them traumatic when they disembark from those rescue ships. The harrowing stories, the horrors of rape, slavery. I heard about this slavery thing at about 2012. A friend of mine called me from Tripoli and said he was kidnapped and ransom were paid from Nigeria to those who kidnapped him. But as time went on, we saw reports on YouTube, on Facebook. Ross Kemp from England did a report, went to Libya. Channels TV in Nigeria also did one. And so I did a report earlier this year about the trafficking of women from Nigeria to Libya and what they experience in Libya. So we receive them. The news are bad. The trauma will live with the victims forever, but they are very strong people, determined to move on with their lives.
Leonard, I just want to show people a picture of where people are coming from, how they're going through Libya. And we're seeing 3 major regions across the African continent where they're actually going from the far west across to the far east, all heading north. And that journey takes them through Libya very often. What has happened in the last few years that has made that journey even more perilous and for there to be even more cases of slavery?
I think what's happened is that Libya is an ungoverned state in effect, and it's a small population. It's 5 million people, the same number of people as come from the small island that I come from Ireland. But it's a huge country, the size of France, bigger. So what's happened is that the economy has become a migrant economy. People are essentially exploiting the migrants as they come through full of hope that they're going to come to some unrealized dream in Europe. But the minute they step off the bus, or more to the point, they're dragged off a truck, their dream turns into a nightmare. And so long before they reach the ocean, as you're showing here, these people are put through the mill in ways which I think we only glimpse the horrors of. We only get a little glimpse of it, and it's truly shocking. And what we've learned in the past couple of weeks is that it's absolutely unacceptable in the modern world that this should be happening.
And now a few more people have gotten a glimpse at it, as you mentioned there. And I think that's what's causing reactions like this. This is Beck on Twitter. She says it's absolutely appalling that this is still happening in these quote unquote modern times. Another person writes in, this is Helen, and she says, this is incomprehensible in the 21st century. Where does the demand side of these markets, quote unquote, these open air slavery markets, as some are calling them, where does the demand come from? Hassan, can you give us a few more details on what this actually looks like when it comes to human smuggling and then payment for those same people?
Well, I mean, in terms of the demand, it's a very good question. I mean, there's a lot of in my interviews with smugglers, with people who are working in that trade, my understanding is that in some cases the buying of these migrants is actually amongst smugglers and traffickers. So it's not necessarily, not in all cases, it's not necessarily, or in most cases, it's not necessarily you're buying this slave to use him as a slave. It's more, I need him to sell him off to another smuggler who can then, exploit that person either for ransom or either to push him to pay for the rest of the journey that this migrant is trying to accomplish.
Imad, you're based in Libya normally. What do you know about this idea of either slave trading, slave marketing, what happens to refugees when they're trying to get through to Europe? What have you seen with your own eyes?
Well, building on what Hassan actually mentioned, I believe that there's usually two ways through which the migrants are smuggled. They're either transported from their home country to the shore, which is quite an expensive journey, and only a small fraction of the migrants can afford this type of journey because it's very expensive. On the other hand, you have migrants that use a leg-to-leg approach. So they stop at certain points, and to afford the journey from one point to another, they either get money sent from their relatives back home, or they work in the point where they stopped at. And I believe that, as Hassan said, again, they sometimes are sold from one smuggler or one trafficker to another. And that's where this whole slavery issue comes in.
Let me just bring in Abdurrahman Al-Fittori. Abdurrahman has been working on the ground in Libya, trying to work with refugees who are in detention centres. He's trying to work with people who are in communities and also heading across the sea towards Europe as well. Abdurrahman, can you tell us what it's like when you see people in the detention centres? What are you seeing? What kind of life are they having?
Of course, it's pretty hard to imagine or just like to put like ourselves in the shoes of those guys who are not, by the way, are criminals or something. The situation is pretty hard in the detention centers. The detention centers that are in Libya are weren't built to be a detention centers, but unfortunately, since the collapse of the Gaddafi's regime in Libya, the number of the migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea has, as you see, increased a lot, as people have taken advantage of the vacuum of authority to set the sail from the country's northern coast. Right. So let's say a network of human smugglers that who facilitate the traffic has expanded in the last few years. But what I'm saying is that most of the detention centers right now weren't built to be as a detention centers. It's just like something or a reaction from the government to accommodate the current situation in here, because most of them are either like schools or old buildings just to facilitate the situation in here. Right now, we have at least 20 to 22,000 migrants at those detention centers.
Right.
And on the other side, we have at least 400,000 IDPs or internally
Goodness
displaced
me.
people. So currently, the government is really like not in a good place to provide the services for both of them. So eventually, the detainees or the migrants will experience a hard time in those buildings.
Abdurrahman, thank you so much for joining us to explain the depth of the issue that you're dealing with there. Malika, let's talk about solutions.
Well, there are lots of people weighing in on that. This is just one person. Billy Suma on Twitter says, short term, the UNHCR should act on the matter to at least handle those who are in Libya and heading to Libya. Long term, resolve the discontent back home to cut down on the refugee crisis, and the UN must deal with the African dictators properly on the matter rather than dancing with them. So lots of ideas there. But Leonard, I want to go to you because, of course, the IOM is working on a solution to this, if you could call it that. What's going on?
The big solution that's happening right now, and it's not a solution long-term, it's a short-term solution, is to get as many of those people that we just heard of who are in detention at the moment and get them home. I mean, just get them home, get an air bridge going and fly out at least 15,000 people in the next couple of weeks. We at the UN Migration Agency have taken out 14,000 so far this year, people who've said that they want to go home. Because this is what's happening. They're being tricked into coming to Libya. They think they're getting on the bus to Europe, but they're not. They're getting into a murder machine, frankly. And by the time we reach them, they are desperate to go home. Colleagues of mine were in detention center last week. There were 1,000 people crammed in a small place saying, take us home. And that's what we're doing. And we're doing it at the request of the African Union, with the financial support of the European Union, and at the urging of the UN Secretary General, and indeed of the Security Council. So this is very much let's get these guys to safety. And there are many, many women, there are unaccompanied minors, there are a lot of people in a very vulnerable position. And I would just like to change the conversation direction slightly, because it is true there's horrible things happening in Libya, but why do people go there in so many numbers? And it is because they hear and read about Europe on social media. They see it on Facebook, free basics. They see they can click and get to a smuggler in one press of a button. And we need the social media companies to step it up a little bit and play their role in explaining that it's not a free ride, that you're not going to get a free trip to a fresh job in Europe. Quite the contrary. There's too many people losing a fortune, losing their lives, wasting their lives, and being terribly exploited.
Leonard, it's interesting you say that because we got this tweet from Sanusi, and Larry, I'll give this to you. Sanusi says, despite everything I see, still some people are making the same journey and others are still planning. Why would someone want to risk being a slave and risk death? Is completely irrational. This is one person's view, of course, but others might say the conditions at home might make that worth it. Larry, what are you hearing from people?
Well, people are coming because of lack of opportunities in home countries. So this is the failure of my own leaders back home in Africa. But on the other hand, the policies in Europe has also helped to make these people move towards Europe. The case of Libya, in my own side, I don't want to blame, but let's really dig deep. They choose the path that they are at the moment. They want it this way. So that's what they get. The issue of racism and all these things has been there in the Libyan society. You know, the town of Tawariga was totally eradicated after the fall of Gaddafi. So let's leave that aside. What are the solutions? The solution, from my own perspective and my own opinion, is that evacuation of our people must take place at the very fast pace. A travel ban should be placed on Libya. Africans should not go to Libya anymore. It's not viable, it's not logical, it's not sensible. And we need to work on the educational process in Africa. A lot of young people lack education. They don't know the dangers of migration. So we need to go back to
That's right.
to work with them in schools, in primary schools,
That's
in
right.
local centers, in community centers, in order to re-educate them, for them to look inwards, because there's a lot of opportunities also.
So Larry, as you're speaking, Imad is I know he has thoughts. Imad, go ahead, join in.
I find it quite ironic, to be honest, that the blame is put on Libya and that a travel ban people say a travel ban should be put on Libya, which might be the case, but if you look at it from a policy perspective and shift your perspective away from the Libyan environment a bit, the EU and the international community also contributed to this. In February, a memorandum of understanding was signed by Italy to actually return and intercept migrants, and the Italian Coast Guard and the Italian government is basically making the Libyan Coast Guard do its dirty work, because legally this is illegal. They are not allowed.
This is just shallow. No. I mean,
these are
hold on a
policy
minute.
issues.
You have people.
These are policy issues.
You have people.
These are policy issues. I agree with you. Europe has done that. Italy signed those kinds of agreements. They paid some militias to.
Stuff.
Yeah. No. Don't let us say it's populist. I'm not in the political divide of Europe left right. I'm a straightforward person. Europe played a key role in what is happening today on the migration issue. So don't let us mince that.
Right.
But solutions is what we are looking for. And the solution is a travel ban. When I mean a travel ban should be placed on African countries, African youths from traveling to Libya, because
which is also an
safe.
African country. Let me just remind everybody. Let me just interject for a moment.
It is not safe anymore.
Because I want to share.
Libya is not what it used to be.
Larry, let me share this with you. Let me share this with you. In fact, I want to share this with Hassan. Hassan, this is from William. William says, this is a very sad story, and I think the people doing this already know this is inhumane. I think the AU, the African Union, should quickly intervene with force. And then this from Yakubu, security action should be taken, the perpetrators should be brought to book. Hassan, what do you make of that, the idea of going in force to stop modern slavery? Is that even possible? Hassan?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is possible at all. I think it would just make the Libyan crisis in itself worse, which is at the heart of why the migration crisis has gotten so bad, and why we're seeing modern day slavery. I think, all of these ideas of let's just shut down the borders and so on, they're great ideas, lovely, but you're talking about thousands and thousands of kilometers of unguarded borders. You're talking about a coast guard which is complicit to the trade. How are you going to do that? How is again, like I know it's a silly comparison, but we look at one comparison that Libyan authorities keep giving to me is the fact that the United States is still unable to completely guard their border with Mexico. If people are going to continue coming, I don't really see a solution where you can stop that. You can definitely work on trying to make conditions better, enforcing if we're going to look at policy changes and so on, and enforcing sanctions on the specific people in Libya who are allowing the situation to be this bad. When we look at the detention centers, for example, we need to look not just at the black market illicit trade side of things, but also what we're seeing in face value. The detention centers are very bad, and there are signs of slavery there as well. I remember in 2014.
The key question is,
I'd like to ask you guys a couple of questions, if I might. If I could just ask a question, is it a good idea? Do you think it's a good idea for an uncontrolled flow of people, human beings, to go into Europe where they're turning the politics of Europe to the extreme right, and they are only destined to work underground or be returned home? That's the first question. And the second question is...
Leonard, hold tight with the first question, because I want someone to answer it. Who did you want that to go to?
Leonard is right.
Well, any of your colleagues, I just want to know if that's... because a lot of people say, blame Europe for stopping people coming, but is it a good idea?
All right, we heard you. We heard the question. We're running out of time. Larry, go ahead, pick it up.
He's right, but the point is, who is benefiting from the human trafficking itself? Who are the people benefiting from it? There are people. Who do I arrest in Libya, for instance? Those people promulgating force, that doesn't work. So let's throw it out. What works is to stop our people, and that can work. It's just a matter of enforcement.
Can I just step in very quickly to respond to that? I mean, when you say, you know, who do I arrest, who do I blame?
Yeah, who?
Ultimately, a lot of the trade is not just, I mean, not to defend Libyans, but a lot of it is not just Libya, but also when you look at the communities in Libya, for example, in South Libya, you're talking about extremely poor communities who pretty much don't have, you know, the chances that these African nations are escaping from themselves. You know, this is a trade that they have found that can give them a bit of money, that can allow them to live.
The guys you're talking of in the South have been smugglers for centuries. They've been smuggling contraband for centuries.
So, gentlemen, may I just interject here, because I want to go back to the community, but I want to share a couple of facts and figures with our audience. Slavery in the Middle East and North Africa, over 2 million people are enslaved. And then looking in slavery in sub-Saharan Africa, more than 6 million people enslaved. And across the entire world, we're talking more like 45 million people enslaved. This is not an issue just about Libya. Malika?
So I wanted to bring this tweet from Nadia, picking up really on a point that you made earlier, Imad. Nadia says exploitation of African migrants and slave auctions for ransom exists in detention centers. It's a serious issue, and it shouldn't be taken as a surprise, but as a measuring stick on how the situation in Libya has become. EU and African nations are also to be blamed for these outcomes. But someone else, picking up on one of those points, Matar says, unfortunately, there is no rule of law across much of Libya, so the world must act, including the international communities. Imad, what do you make of that, talking about the political situation in Libya and the landscape there is fractured?
There is no denying that the political situation in Libya is a mess, basically, and there is no rule of law. Now, if you look at it from a totally pragmatic point of view, slavery was abolished by legal reform. So from, a totally realistic point of view, if the country itself does not have a rule of law, and if migratory flow are disrupted in a way where migrants are returned to Libya when they're intercepted at sea, slavery could reemerge given the economic problems that Libya is going through. As Hassan said, you're talking about people that do not have a source of income and that consider this a trade. So for them, slavery is an economic option. It's not because they're necessarily evil. It is because this is what they see as
evil. It is evil.
It is, of course. I mean, from their perspective.
Correct yourself.
I mean, from their perspective.
You know, we've gone through that in the past. It's an evil phenomenon.
It is an evil phenomenon. I mean that from their perspective, it is an economic alternative. If they had better options, they would not be engaged in this. And if African migrants had better conditions at home, from South Africa, they would stay there.
Gentlemen, I'm just going to go back to Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman is working with people who are in detention centres in horrific conditions right now. Abdurrahman, I'm going to ask you to sum it up in a simple sentence, if you can, right at the end of this programme. What difference does conversations like this have on the detainees who are in Libya right now? The refugees, the migrants who got caught up and are stuck. What difference does this conversation have for their lives?
For 99% for those migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, whoever, they are only talking that the smugglers who took them from their homes, which is in this case it's either in Nigeria and Niger and Sudan and whatever countries that are outside of the Libyan borders.
So Abdurrahman, I'm going to ask you very briefly, and just for a yes and no answer at the end of the show, do conversations like this, are they helpful?
Of course not. I'm so sorry. Of course not.
All right. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Leonard and Larry and Abdurrahman and Hassan and Imad. The conversation continues always online, and hopefully we can find ways that will help the detainees in Libya and the slave people around the world. See you online. Take care, everybody.